The invasion. Amara had always cherished the quiet moments in her life. The gentle hum of the farm machinery, the soft rustle of the trees as the wind swept through the distant forests, and the warm embrace of her son, Eli, as they worked together in the fields. But on this day, the skies above her peaceful home were not serene. The sun hung low, casting an orange glow over the settlement. But Amara felt an unease gnaw at her heart. She paused in her work, looking up at the horizon. The wind had picked up, swirling dust into the air. A loud rumble echoed through the earth, low at first, like thunder, but steadily growing louder. Her pulse quickened, and her eyes scanned the sky, searching for the source. Then she saw it. A shadow. No, not just a shadow. A massive ship, descending from the sky with a speed and power that left no room for doubt. It was the unmistakable silhouette of an Imperial warship, and it was coming straight for her village. Eli, Amara shouted, turning toward her son, who was playing with his small toy at the base of a nearby tree. Get inside now. Eli's wide eyes locked onto his mother's face. The sudden urgency in her voice was enough to make him spring to his feet. He ran toward her, his small legs moving faster than she had ever seen them. What's happening, Mama? Get inside. Now, she urged, her voice cracking. She grabbed his hand, her heart pounding as she scanned the skies. The ship was closer now, its engines growling in an ominous cadence. Without a word, Eli ran inside the small farmhouse they called home, and Amara followed, locking the door behind them. She pressed her back against the door, trying to steady her breath. But the sound of distant explosions and the shrieks of terrified villagers made it clear that the nightmare was just beginning. Amara's thoughts flashed to her husband, Yarrick. He had been away for weeks on a mission, one that had kept him in the outer reaches of the galaxy. She had grown used to his long absences, though they still troubled her. Now, as the warship descended, she couldn't help but fear that she might never see him again. Yarrick was a skilled fighter, but this was no ordinary attack. The Galactic Empire had never come this close to their home before. Another explosion rattled the house, this time much closer. Amara winced, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the walls. She grabbed Eli's hand again, pulling him toward the back of the house. We need to hide, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But as she moved toward the back door, she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots outside. She froze, listening for any movement. The Empire's soldiers had arrived. The door was kicked open with a deafening crash, and Amara's heart skipped a beat. Standing in the doorway were two heavily armored Imperial soldiers, their faces obscured by visors, their weapons raised. Amara instinctively shielded Eli behind her, though she knew the soldiers would see them both clearly. Weapons down, civilian, one of the soldiers commanded in a cold, metallic voice. His tone was devoid of emotion, as though they were simply executing a task. Amara's mind raced. She had no weapons to defend herself, no means of escape. Her only option was to try to delay them long enough for something, anything, to happen. She kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled. What do you want with us? You are being relocated, the soldier replied, his voice robotic. The Empire has ordered your extraction. Relocated? Amara's eyes narrowed. She didn't trust these soldiers, didn't trust their empty promises. Why? The soldier's visor remained expressionless. That is not for you to know. Before Amara could react, the soldier moved forward, grabbing her by the arm with a strength that sent a shock of pain through her body. Come with us, he ordered. No, Amara resisted, yanking her arm away. I'm pregnant. You can't take me. My son is here. The second soldier stepped forward, pointing his weapon at her. We have orders. Now move. Tears sprang to Amara's eyes as she looked down at Eli, who clung to her side, his face pale with fear. Stay close to me, Eli, she whispered, her heart breaking as she led him away from their only safe place. The soldiers advanced as Amara and Eli were herded out of the house, their world crumbling around them. She tried to think of a way to fight back, to escape, but she knew it was futile. The Empire was too powerful, and the ship overhead was only a glimpse of the terrifying force they had brought to bear. As they walked through the village, Amara noticed the same scene unfolding everywhere. Soldiers were rounding up the villagers, forcing them into transport ships, while others tore through homes, searching for any signs of resistance. The peaceful life she had known was slipping away with every passing second. They reached the base of the Imperial ship, and Amara's legs shook beneath her as she was escorted up the ramp. Inside, the cold, sterile environment was a far cry from the warmth of her home. The ship's walls were made of smooth, metallic surfaces that gleamed in the harsh light. It felt suffocating, as if the very air was designed to suppress any sense of hope. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Eli's voice trembled as he looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. Amara bit back the lump in her throat. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. "He's not far, Eli. I promise." She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. The door to the holding cells slid shut with a metallic hiss. As Amara and Eli were locked inside, she knew one thing for certain. The Empire had no idea who they had just captured. They had no idea that Amara's husband, Yarrick, was one of their greatest enemies, a man who had once stood against the Empire's might and now operated as a shadow in their ranks. They had no idea who Amara was, or that the very child she carried could change the course of their war. But that knowledge was her secret. For now, she had to survive. And for Eli, she would do anything. The unknown husband. Amara's world had become a nightmare in the span of mere hours. The once peaceful settlement, the place she had called home, was now a distant memory, a casualty of the Galactic Empire's overwhelming might. She and Eli were now prisoners aboard an Imperial warship, its cold, sterile halls an unforgiving contrast to the warmth and comfort of the life they had once known. The holding cells were cramped, with cold metal walls that seemed to swallow all light. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of fear and metal. Eli was silent beside her, clutching her hand tightly as though afraid to let go. Amara couldn't blame him. She was just as afraid, though she dared not show it. Not now, not in front of him. As they were led deeper into the ship, Amara felt the weight of her situation bearing down on her. She had no idea where they were being taken, nor what the Empire intended to do with them. She was just another prisoner, a nameless, faceless captive to the Empire's relentless expansion. But her mind was racing, focusing on one thought: Yarrick. Yarrick was her husband, a man of extraordinary skill, courage, and cunning. A man who had fought against the Empire with all the ferocity of a cornered wolf. A man whose very existence was a thorn in the Empire's side. And yet, in this moment, no one aboard this ship knew who she was, or who her husband truly was. Her heart clenched as she thought of him. He had always been the one to protect her, to shield her from the horrors of the galaxy. But now, as she sat in this cold cell with Eli by her side, she had to protect him. She had to survive for him, for their child. "Mommy, when will we see Daddy?" Eli asked quietly, breaking the silence between them. His small voice trembled with fear, his innocent question stabbing at Amara's heart. She swallowed hard, forcing back the tears that threatened to rise. "We'll see him soon, Eli. I promise," she said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. The truth was, she had no idea when, or if, they would ever see Yarrick again. The last time she had heard from him, he was on a mission far beyond the reach of the Empire, tracking down rebel activity. He had told her it would be a short mission, but that was before the invasion, before everything had been torn apart. The ship continued its slow, ominous journey through the void of space, its engines humming with the power of a fleet far beyond anything Amara had ever seen. She had grown up in a colony far from the Empire's core, never expecting to be caught in the grip of such a vast and merciless force. Amara's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. 2 Imperial soldiers stood in front of her cell, their black armor reflecting the harsh overhead lights. One of them held a data pad, his face expressionless behind the dark visor. "Prisoner Amara, you're to be taken to the interrogation chambers," one of the soldiers announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "You will comply." Amara's stomach tightened. "Interrogation," she echoed, her voice sharp. "I haven't done anything to deserve interrogation." The soldier remained unmoved. You have been captured as a potential threat to the Empire. All prisoners undergo interrogation. She wanted to argue, to scream, but she knew it would be futile. The Empire didn't care about innocence. They only cared about power. Without another word, the soldiers opened the door to the cell and motioned for Amara and Eli to follow. Amara hesitated for a moment, casting a final glance at the cold metal walls that had become her prison. Then, taking a deep breath, she stood up and took Eli's hand, walking toward the unknown. The corridors of the ship were a maze of gleaming metal and harsh lights, an oppressive reminder of the Empire's dominance. Amara's mind raced, but she kept her focus on Eli, who looked up at her with wide, fearful eyes. "Where are we going, Mommy?" he asked, his voice a whisper. "To talk to some people, Eli." "We'll be okay," she replied, trying to sound reassuring despite the knot in her stomach. The truth was, she had no idea what was going to happen to them. But she would not let fear take hold. Not yet. They were led to a small, sterile room. A single chair sat in the center, facing a table where two more soldiers sat, their faces hard as stone. Behind them, a large screen flickered to life, revealing an imposing officer seated at a desk. His uniform was a deep shade of crimson, indicating his high rank within the Empire. "Amara," the officer began, his voice smooth, cold. "You've been taken into custody for reasons of national security. Do not make this difficult. Tell us everything you know about the human resistance. Who are your allies? Where's your husband?" The mention of Jarek's name sent a shiver through Amara's spine. She forced herself to remain calm, though her mind screamed in protest. If they knew who Jarek was, they would stop at nothing to destroy him. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Jarek wasn't just another resistance fighter. He was a ghost, a shadow in the Empire's own ranks, a man whose skill and tactics had earned him the respect of every rebel faction and the fear of every Imperial officer. But no one aboard this ship knew that. They thought they were dealing with a helpless pregnant woman and her child. Amara met the officer's gaze, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her tone cool. "I'm just a doctor. I don't know anything about any resistance." The officer leaned forward, his expression cold and calculating. "Don't lie to me, Amara. You are far more valuable than you realize. You are connected to someone much more important than yourself. I suggest you start talking before things get unpleasant." Amara's pulse raced, but she kept her composure. She knew what they were trying to do, break her. But she would not betray Jarek. "Not now. Not ever. I told you," she said, her voice unwavering. "I don't know anything." The officer stared at her for a long moment before nodding curtly. "Very well. We will find out soon enough." As Amara was led back to her cell, her mind raced with one thought. Jarek. They had no idea who they had captured. But soon they would. And when they did, it would be too late. The reckoning. Amara lay on the cold, metal cot in her cell, staring at the ceiling. She had long since stopped trying to sleep. The reality of her captivity had settled into her bones, a constant, gnawing presence that kept her awake every night. The endless hum of the warship's engines, the distant clang of doors opening and closing, and the occasional footsteps of soldiers patrolling the corridors. These sounds had become her lullaby in a nightmare. Eli was asleep beside her, his small frame curled up on the cot next to hers. His soft breathing was the only comfort Amara had left, a reminder of the innocence she was fighting to protect. But even in her quiet moments, she couldn't shake the terror that gripped her heart. Jarek had not come. No message, no sign. She had no way of knowing where he was, or if he even knew they had been taken. The Empire had already interrogated her twice, each session colder and more hostile than the last. But she hadn't cracked. She couldn't. Not with Eli's life hanging in the balance. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden hiss of the cell door sliding open. Two soldiers stood in the doorway, their armor reflecting the harsh overhead lights. One of them stepped forward, his expression as blank and emotionless as the walls surrounding them. "Amara, you're needed in the command center," he said, his voice flat. Amara's heart skipped a beat. The command center? What would they want with her now? Were they planning something worse than just questioning her? The thought made her stomach churn, but she forced herself to stand, her legs trembling slightly beneath her. "Take Eli to the playroom," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "He'll be safe there." The soldier nodded, motioning to Eli, who had already woken up and was looking at her with those big, wide eyes. He still didn't understand the danger. To him, this was all a game, a strange, terrifying game, but a game nonetheless. Eli gave her a small, hesitant smile. "Don't worry, Mommy. I'll be okay." Amara tried to return the smile, but it felt forced, like a mask she could no longer wear. "I know you will, Eli." The soldier took Eli's hand gently, leading him out of the cell. Amara watched them go, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she might never see him again. They were taking him away, away from her, away from any chance of protection. She had no choice but to trust that somehow she would find a way to reunite with him. But deep down, she knew that time was running out. Once the door slid shut behind her, Amara was left alone with the two soldiers. They guided her down the long, sterile halls of the ship, past rows of identical doors, past unfeeling faces, until they reached the command center. The doors opened to reveal a large, dimly lit room filled with Imperial officers and a vast array of technology. Screens blinked with data, and officers moved with practiced precision, their every motion calculated and efficient. At the far end of the room, seated at a desk, was an officer in crimson armor. His back was straight, and his eyes locked onto Amara with a cold, calculating gaze. He didn't rise as she entered, nor did he acknowledge the soldiers who had escorted her. Instead, he simply gestured for her to approach. "Amara," he said, his voice smooth and cold, "we are reaching the limit of our patience. You continue to insist that you know nothing about the resistance, but we know better." Amara remained silent, her hands clenched at her sides. She had nothing more to say to them. Her resolve had hardened over the past few days. She would not betray Yarrick, no matter what they did to her. The Empire had no idea what they were dealing with. "We know your husband is connected to the resistance," the officer continued, his tone unchanging. "We have traced his movements through Imperial databases. He is a threat, one we plan to neutralize. But first, we need you to tell us everything you know about him." Amara's heart raced, but she didn't let it show. She knew this was the moment. The Empire was closing in on Yarrick, and they had no idea how close they were to their own destruction. They had no idea that Yarrick was the one thing standing between the Empire and utter defeat. "I don't know what you're talking about," Amara said, her voice steady. "I'm just a doctor. I know nothing about any resistance." The officer leaned forward, his hands steepled in front of him. "Amara, you're not just a doctor. You are the wife of one of the most dangerous men in the galaxy. And we're going to make sure that you tell us everything you know, whether you want to or not." Amara's heart pounded her chest. She could feel the walls closing in on her, but she knew she couldn't let them break her. Not yet. Not when she had something even more powerful than they could ever imagine. Just as the officer stood, his hand reaching for a device on the desk, the lights in the command center flickered. A strange noise reverberated through the walls. A hum, like the sound of an engine starting up, but different. Amara's pulse quickened as she sensed something was wrong. The officer's expression faltered, just for a moment. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Before anyone could answer, the room shook violently. The lights went out completely, plunging the command center into darkness. A sudden explosion echoed through the ship, followed by the unmistakable sound of blaster fire. The officer cursed under his breath, his eyes narrowing as he grabbed for his weapon. "What's happening?" Amara's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was happening. Yarrick had found them. The Empire's reign was about to be shattered, and the reckoning had begun. The doors to the command center slammed open, and a figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim emergency lights. A man in dark, tactical armor, with a scar across his cheek and a deadly calm in his eyes. Yarrick. Amara's breath caught in her throat. He was here. He had come for them. "I don't think you'll be needing this anymore," Yarrick said, his voice low and filled with authority. The officer's hand dropped from his weapon as he realized who had entered the room. Yarrick, the officer snarled, stepping back. You're dead. You should have stayed in the shadows. Yarrick smiled coldly. I'm never in the shadows. Not when it comes to my family. With a swift motion, Yarrick raised his blaster and fired. The officer crumpled to the ground, lifeless before he hit the floor. Amara, Yarrick said, his eyes softening as he approached. Let's go. We're getting out of here. Amara's heart surged with relief and overwhelming love. The nightmare was over, the human awakening. The explosion had barely subsided before the warship seemed to come alive in a frenzy. Alarms blared throughout the vessel, red lights flashing with a frantic urgency that mirrored the chaos unfolding within its walls. The once pristine corridors of the ship were now filled with panic, with Imperial soldiers rushing to restore order. But they were too late. Yarrick had already struck. His strike was swift, precise, and unyielding. The warship was under siege, and the Empire's grip on it was slipping. Amara stood at the doorway of the command center, watching in stunned silence as Yarrick moved with the calm assurance of a man who had fought countless battles and emerged victorious each time. His every step was deliberate, his eyes scanning the room for threats, but the only thing that mattered now was her. Amara. Jarrick's voice cut through the commotion, steady and filled with resolve. He reached out to her, his hand outstretched. Her heart raced as she rushed into his arms, the world narrowing down to just the two of them. The past days of fear and uncertainty melted away in that single moment. She could feel the warmth of him, the strength she had always relied on, and for the first time since their capture, Amara allowed herself to breathe. I knew you'd come, she whispered, her voice trembling. Yarrick smiled softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. I always come for you. For both of you. His eyes flicked down to where Eli stood at her side, looking bewildered but safe. I'll never leave you again. Eli, still holding onto Amara's hand, stared at Yarrick with a mixture of awe and confusion. Daddy, he asked hesitantly. Yarrick knelt in front of him, his face softening with tenderness. Hey, buddy. I'm here. We're going to get out of here. Okay. Eli nodded, a small, relieved smile breaking through his earlier fear. For a brief moment, they were simply a family again, reunited in the face of unimaginable danger. But that fleeting peace was short-lived. The rumble of explosions echoed from deeper within the ship, and the sounds of battle grew louder. The Imperial forces were rallying. Yarrick stood up, his expression hardening as he turned toward the doorway. We don't have much time. The Empire is going to send everything they have to stop us. We need to move. Amara's heart raced again, but not from fear. This time, it was the pulse of adrenaline. She had felt it before, in the thick of the fight for freedom, when survival was no longer a question of if, but when. They rushed through the ship's hallways, Yarrick leading the way, Amara close behind him with Eli in tow. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors, moving as quickly as possible while staying under the radar of the remaining Imperial soldiers. The warship, once a symbol of the Empire's might, was now a maze of chaos. Every corner seemed to present new threats, but Yarrick handled them with cold efficiency, his blaster never faltering, his instincts sharp. Where are we going? Amara asked breathlessly as they turned another corner. Jarrick's gaze never wavered. The hangar bay. There's a transport ship waiting. We'll get out of here. They passed several more Imperial soldiers, but Yarrick made quick work of them, neutralizing the threat with minimal effort. It wasn't long before they reached the hangar bay doors, which loomed in front of them like the final hurdle between freedom and certain death. But as they approached, the door slid open suddenly, revealing a squadron of Imperial troopers waiting on the other side, blasters aimed directly at them. The odds were stacked against them, but Yarrick didn't flinch. He stepped forward, standing tall, his voice carrying the weight of an undeniable truth. Get out of our way, he said, his tone low and dangerous. The lead soldier hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the threat before him. You're not leaving here alive, traitor, he spat. Jarrick's eyes gleamed with determination, and with a fluid motion, he raised his blaster and fired, taking down the lead soldier before he could even react. The rest of the squad scattered, but they were no match for Jarek's precision. In mere seconds, the hangar bay was cleared, the soldiers lying motionless on the cold metal floor. Amara's heart was pounding in her chest as she hurried toward the transport ship that awaited them. Jarek motioned for her to hurry, his eyes scanning the perimeter for any other threats. "We need to move, Amara," he urged. The transport ship's hatch opened, revealing a small crew of rebels who had been waiting for them. They looked like seasoned warriors, battle-worn but ready to fight for the cause. The pilot, a tall woman with sharp features, gave them a brief nod before turning back to her controls. "Get in," she called out. "We're not staying long." Jarek helped Amara and Eli aboard, then climbed in after them. As the hatch closed behind them, the transport ship's engines roared to life. The ship began to lift off the ground, and Amara felt a rush of hope flood through her. They were escaping. They were free. But even as the ship ascended, a deep sense of unease settled in her chest. They had made it off the warship, but the fight wasn't over. The Empire would not let them go so easily. Jarek had made powerful enemies, and the price of their freedom would be steep. "Where to?" the pilot asked as she expertly maneuvered the transport through the chaos of the Imperial warship. Jarek turned to Amara, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Wherever we go, we'll make them pay. The Empire will not forget this day." Amara nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about revenge. It was about waking humanity to the truth of their oppression and showing the galaxy that even the mightiest empire could fall. As the ship raced toward the stars, Amara knew that their fight was far from over. The Galactic Empire would never forget the day it had been forced to reckon with the strength of humanity's will, and they would never stop fighting until the Empire was nothing more than a shadow in the history books. The human awakening had begun.